Good morning, my creative friends. This is Dr. Minette Riordan, and this is Painting in Your PJs with Minette live at 7 a.m. Mountain Time, Monday to Thursday. So, this is our last day to gather live this week. And here on Painting Live in Your PJs, we make time to work in our visual journals to gather, to connect, to create in community to share thoughts and reflections on life, love, and art, and to really play with all the different ways that making art and working with visual journaling is such a powerful process to deepen our relationship with ourselves. For me, art is a path to healing, to wholeness, to transformation, and that's going to be particularly true today with the painting we're going to create. My voice is still getting warmed up this morning, so it'll take me a few minutes to get past the little bit of a froggy voice, and it's all good. So, this is February, and for February, I seem to be feeling called, at least these first few days, to a particularly bright color palette. Good morning, Judy. So I've got my same light green, cad yellow, fluorescent pink, and my favorite golden teal here. And I'm having a lot of fun playing with these colors to kick off the month yesterday. We had a lot of fun creating a sacred circle design and looking at the things that bring us joy. I popped in a photo of myself there to remind myself that I do feel radiant. I do have a lot of joy. And we're focusing on self love. And I shared yesterday that self love, there's a path to self love, and there's many paths to self love. But one of those paths really is about having self esteem, self compassion, and self acceptance. And the way that we can get there is through what I call my 6 pillars of a radiant life. 6 pillars of a radiant life. Good morning, Blanca. And those 6 pillars, I'm just grabbing my notes up here on my desk that are buried. The 6 pillars of a radiant life are deep rest, deep reflection, deep play, deep connection, deep work, and deep experience. So I'm going to be spending a lot of time over the next week really working with these pillars. Some of you are familiar with these, some of them they'll be new to you. Good morning, Marion. Welcome, welcome. But we're going to do this through the lens of how to be more loving, kind, accepting, and compassionate towards ourselves. And how can we do that on the page? So, yesterday, again, we started with our mandala design. And then I had a couple of meetings yesterday where I was just sitting and listening. So, I had some fun just playing in my journal again with some stencils and those bright colors and my white Posca, and just being in the energy of remembering that I am love. And when I am love, everything else is easy. Everything else is easy. And I love this hand stencil. This is a super fun stencil from Megan Quislin, and you can find her on Instagram, and she has an Etsy store with all kinds of stencils. But I love this hand stencil in particular. But today I want to work with painting people in a fun, easy way to get people into your visual journal. And before I got on the call, I was just warming up this morning and had a magazine cut out with a part of a shape. And I just used that shape. Now I don't know what I did with it, or I would show it to you. But I used that shape to just draw this simple figure of a woman gazing off into the distance. It's white paint. There were already some scribbles on the page and a Stabilo pen. And sometimes we think our pages have to be really complicated, and sometimes it's the simplest of pages. Like this feels like deep rest. So she's just sitting quietly, almost like she has a blanket wrapped around her. She's looking off into the distance. So it's fun to create complicated pages, but remember sometimes simplicity is your best friend. But today I want to work with this figure of a woman. This is from an old National Geographic magazine. I have cut her away from her background, and you can see the photo is old, it's pretty dark, but I love this look on her face. Like there is a lot of love and confidence and just sort of deep presence with herself. And it's really beautiful. And so I thought it would be fun to incorporate her into a page, but I want to make the photograph my own. So I am going to use Matte Medium to put her down on the page, and then I'm going to completely paint over her using this as my guide and inspiration, but making that figure my own. And I took some time before we got on the call to just do a little journaling on my page. Today, I did that with a pencil. And I was writing about one of the pillars of a radiant life, which is deep reflection. And when I think about the connection between, and I'm going to put some white paint over this, between self love and deep reflection, the times when I feel disconnected or upset or worried, I'm not giving myself time to kind of go within and figure out what is going on. And this is just some titanium white paint that I'm going to put on here. And I notice when I'm not in deep reflection, it could be because I'm in avoidance or numbing out, sitting in front of the television. In the past, I would have numbed out with a few drinks or glasses of wine, binge watching shows on Netflix, but really distracting myself from what is going on within. And so it's so important to make time to really connect deeply with ourselves, with our bodies. I was on a call recently with a friend who is a specialist in menopause and talking about how much of our lives we spend really sort of ignoring our bodies, and how menopause is a time in women's life when our bodies are going, hello, I'm here. It's time to pay attention to me. And so I think that deep reflection is like that. It allows us to pay attention to what's happening within us. Just cleaning off that wedge. And I'm going to get this page nice and dry. But if you're working along with me while I'm doing some drawing, you might write some thoughts about, what does deep reflection mean to you? What does deep reflection mean to you? And one of the things that I wrote about this morning was that art making is a form of deep reflection, especially visual journaling, where I'm writing, I'm painting, I'm often writing and journaling again afterwards. And so I think there is an opportunity to use our creative practice as a way to be in deep reflection and deep connection to ourselves. So I'm going to mute myself here for a minute. All right, so I have this page nice and dry. I can still see some of that handwriting through, which I love. By the time I'm done, I won't be able to see it at all. And now I think I'm going to come in and do a painty background, a messy painty background similar to this, to get those colors on the page before I bring my figure onto the page. And I'm actually thinking, what would it be like to maybe get some stencils down on the page before the paint? So I'm just going to try that and see. It's a different way of layering than I normally do. Get a clean makeup sponge here. I've still just got the same stencils that were sitting here yesterday. I'm going to get some black paint down on my palette here. Good morning, Barbara. Got that nice hot cup of coffee all ready to go this morning. So again, when working with stencils and a makeup sponge, not having too much paint on your sponge will make sure that you don't get the paint all bulging up. You'll get a nice clean print from your stencil. It'll keep the back of your stencil from getting too gummed up as well. I don't know why I'm feeling like these polka dots feel really fun this morning. Again, this is those early layers. It's about getting something on the page, getting that blank page behind me, having something to respond to. Those polka dots are pretty fun. I am going to just clean my stencil off on my paper here. Stop it from paint from getting too built up. If you get paint built up too much on your stencils, they don't lie as flat, they don't work as well. And so sometimes I will just soak them in some water and dish soap, and the paint will peel right off. I let them soak for a couple of hours. And so I pay attention to if they're getting too gummed up, but otherwise I don't worry about them too much. And I don't know why I'm feeling called to this black and white this morning. So I've got a Stabilo Marks All pencil. And again, all these things they're going to get covered up at the end. And so this is just having that little bit of just mindful, playful fun, putting some marks down on the page, knowing it's mostly going to get painted over. And there's something about deep reflection, I think, that really invites us to slow down in our art, not to move so fast. Coloring sacred circles, like we talked about yesterday, really gets us into that mindful, playful, reflective space. When our hands are busy, our minds can be quiet. When our hands are busy, our minds can be quiet. And so now I can just come back with a little bit of water. And it just creates interesting marks over the top of the other paint. This is one of my favorite tools that I use a lot is the Stabilo Marks All pencil. They come in different colors, but I have found that black is definitely my go-to. It's kind of a fun page all by itself. So what I might do in a case like this when I'm like, oh, that's really fun, I don't necessarily, I'm like, oh, I could use that for something else another time, or maybe that's not where I'm going. So a great tip, and you can dip that Stabilo straight into water and draw with it that way too. So a great tip with a background, a painty background that like this that you like is just to simply take a picture of it, because then you can print that page out later. And here I have a nice piece of collage fodder that I can use again, again, and again. So taking pictures of your backgrounds and then repurposing and reusing them is a fun thing to do. Okay, so I'm going to hit this with the dryer again real quick. I won't mute myself, and you guys can tell me if it's too loud if you prefer it when I do mute. So I got that mostly dry. I have a few spots where I had a little couple of puddles, so just going to make sure. And the reason I want that to be nice and dry is because I don't want that black to come in and interfere with all of the next layers. And again, like I said, normally I put the paint down and stencil on the top. And it's fun when you have these different techniques that you enjoy to mix the layers, mix the steps of the layers, and see what is pleasing to you. What is pleasing to you? So again, I'm just coming in with a brayer, starting to move some paint around the background. I'm not thinking about where I'm going yet. I'm not thinking about what this I want this character to look like when I get to the end. Cleaning my brayer off on my newsprint. I seem to be particularly obsessed with this fluorescent pink, and it was one of those things that had been floating around in my big old bucket of paint over here, and I hadn't maybe even noticed it was there, but maybe it was on the bottom and things got stirred up. So once a while, it's fun to go through your stash. So I'm coming in with just this big scraper because I want to get those transparent layers going on here. But go through your collection of paints and notice what haven't you used in a long time, right? What's maybe gotten a little bit buried in there that you could bring out and try and play with a different palette. And again, unintentionally, I'm still in the same family I have been since the beginning of the year of these are all variations of primary colors. It's amazing what you can do with blue, a shade of blue, a shade of yellow, and a shade of red, right? So we have a teal, a cad yellow, and this fluorescent pink, but they're still very much in that bright, happy side of the color wheel. And it's going to be interesting to have this very bright page next to this stark black and white page. And I'm wondering if this is just going to get calmed down a lot in order to match that, or if they're just going to be two separate pages, because I don't think much is going to happen over here. I think I may come back with a black micron and add some patterns and tingles to her blanket here, but she's in deep rest, so it feels soft and quiet and sort of wintry. So noticing this page is feeling noisy and busy, and maybe that's not what I want deep reflection to feel like. So what I'm feeling now is I've gotten all these colors down. The colors make me happy, and I'm going to come in again with my white and just go over that and just soften that all up again. And I also want to soften it, knowing that those layers are there because I'm going to want my figure to stand out, right? And right now my background is a little too noisy and busy for that. So I'm going to come back in with just some titanium white. And let's try the catalyst wedge this time. See what kind of, and that may be more paint than I want. So we're just going to scrape some of that off. And I have a lot left here on my catalyst wedge. I know I'll be using white later, so I'm just going to make a little pile of that on my palette and save it for later. And let's see, where did my yellow one go? So I love that I can still see the colors. I can still see the marks behind. but all of a sudden the whole piece feels softer, right? I've pushed all of that to the background. I can still see the polka dots and the circles here on the page, but that whole background now is feeling much, much softer. So when I put my figure on here, let's see if I can, no, it's going to be maybe a little glary. Magazine images are hard because there's a lot of glare on them. But now when I put her on there, I'm seeing more of her and not the background, but I still have this background behind her. So I'm going to go ahead and get her down on the page with some matte medium underneath her and over the top of her. I don't really care if my paint isn't quite dry and I get a little bit of paint on her because I'm going to paint over her anyway. So get a nice layer of matte medium on my page, on the back of my image. And because I know I'm going to paint over her, I want that matte medium to be really smooth. I think what I was drawn to was the look of confidence on her face. And she has a beautiful floral wreath crown on her head that I will recreate also. And in the image, she had some long hair flowing, so I'm going to bring some of that back as well. But I want to make sure that we get her down really smoothly, create a nice smooth surface to paint on. So what are other people working on this morning? So this is a great way to get a picture of people into your journal and then use them as a guide. You'll get way better at painting people and faces with this technique. Get some matte medium over here. Interesting, getting a little bit of color on that background over there as well. It's kind of fun, just grunges that up. But I want to use up that matte medium. Interesting. All right, so now I'm going to come in and start painting the figure. By the time I'm done with her, I may want to even change the background more, but we have a really good place to start. Awesome, Kay, you're making a journal for visual journaling class. I love it. So excited to get started on visual journaling class next week. Okay, so now I'm going to come in and mix a fleshy color for most of her body. I'm also thinking I'm going to come in with my white Posca so I don't lose the features of her face once I start painting. And I'm using white just because this is a dark background. A lot of her nose is in shadow, but I want to be able to remember once I start painting where her face is and not lose that. So I'm just using a Posca. You could do this with any color, any marker. I just happen to have that white Posca. And so now already we can see her face. We can see the line of her chin. Posca's up here. Just want to kind of remember where some of those lines are before we start going in and painting so I can paint around those areas. Let's see. So I'm thinking just the tiniest little bit of red, what I'm going to need. And some of the, this is a raw sienna, which makes a gorgeous skin tone. Maybe. Apparently we're down at the very end of that one. See if we can get just a little more. There's always more in there when we think, and sometimes we just have to work a little bit to get it out. I'm a fan of not wasting paint. Good morning, Georgia. Move that over a little so you can see my palette there. So I've got some burnt sienna, I've got my white, I've got a little bit of red. I have a cat in my lap. And all right, I'm going to start with that. I'm going to take my palette knife. I'm going to take some of that white, a little bit of that burnt sienna. And actually, that's a really nice color. Let me just put some of that on there to start to see. I'm not trying to even match the skin tone of the photograph, right? But learning to mix our own skin tones, you can't really buy a paint that has like the perfect skin tone, and especially depends on what your skin tone is. I tend to be fairly olive toned. Other people are fair. Other people are all different beautiful shades of browns and blacks. So I didn't quite get her stuck down here under these edges, so no problem. We're just going to come back with a little bit of the matte medium. Georgia, you're not helping, sweetheart. Off you go. And I don't usually like to use my brushes in my matte medium unless I'm going to wash them right away, because it can really gum up and ruin your brushes. But I want to make sure I get that way up under there. All right, just noticing where miss these little corners down here. Okay, groovy. What's everybody else working on this morning? Anybody painting along? And I would love to hear thoughts and reflections. I want to hear what you're working on, but I'd love to hear thoughts too about this idea of deep reflection. Do you give yourself permission to spend time? Do you have favorite tools that help you get into deep reflection? Is it something you enjoy, something you find challenging? And again, I'm going to keep her pretty abstract. I'm not trying to capture every nuance. The magazine image cut off here, so I'm sort of just continuing her arm there. Maybe just giving a little definition. I'm going to probably bring in some hair here. It was hard to see in that image. If you're trying this process of painting over a figure for the first time, I recommend using a light image that you can really see all the features. So I'm going to bring some lights into her face where the light would be hitting her face, and there's part of her that's in shadow because of the way that she's looking out into the distance. coming in with those little bit darker. I want a little bit more of that. Let's see. Some of those darker tones going in there as well. Again, we'll just keep going back and forth between the darks and the lights. And all of a sudden, she no longer looks like the magazine image. It looks like an original painting on the page where I've just used that magazine image as inspiration and guide. I think some of this, we're going to bring back some of her hair flowing out from under that beautiful floral wreath, which I will paint last. Barbara says, definitely allow deep reflection and think it's an important part of our journey and understanding our world, our universe. Yes, both our inner world and the external world. There's been a lot happening in the world lately, and it's easy to get overly caught up in worry, anxiety, fear, and it's actually easy to get really distant from ourselves during times of worry and fear as well. And making time for deep reflection is so important for just going back into understanding, right? Understanding. So she had a string of pearls around her neck, so we'll bring some of that back. And in the photo, it was hard to see, but she also has this big flower right here, so I'm probably going to bring that flower back as well. I love that, Blanca. Reflecting on your art, your style. How do you really want to create? Following your heart. Beautiful. Yeah, using the magazine image as a guide is such a great way to begin. And I've seen, other art teachers teaching that, and it's such a great way to just get started painting faces and also understanding perspective when you're drawing faces. There's a very specific way to draw faces, and this is a great way to see those proportions in action, to see light and shadow. All right, I'm going to bring back some of our brights now. The places just where that light is hitting her. And I'm just going to keep working on her face until I'm pretty happy with the colors and the shades. Again, we're not going for perfection, we're going for abstraction here. And this part of her face is really all in shadow. So she's coming together nicely, quickly. Again, not spending hours and days trying to get this right, but just letting that magazine image guide me. All right, so I'm going to come in and work on her eyes and eyebrows and her mouth. Just another tiny little spot of the black there. Oops. So I'm working with a small angled brush. And her nostril there. And those kind of lines under her eyes. Again, just using my own guidelines there that I had in there. And I kind of like the white around her eyes, so I'm thinking I'm not going to change that. And you notice her lips are red, but they're not like lipsticky red. They're very natural red. I'm going to come in, get that base layer of color down, and then I'll come back and add some details over the top of her mouth as well. Maybe even just a little spot of red in her cheekbones here. And I'm going to start, because I have the red on my brush, building up some abstract floral shapes here in her beautiful crown. The image was so much in shadow I couldn't really see what the flowers were, just that they were flowers. So just again, this is a great way to practice just that sort of more abstract. We're capturing the feeling of flowers, not the truth of specific kinds of flowers. Marion, you're redoing the lotus from a couple of weeks ago that we did. That's awesome. I love it. And I love the look on her face, like she's in deep reflection, right? It looks like she's in deep reflection. And I want to just paint out that little bit of Posca line on there. So I'm going to work on her nose a little bit. And again, the more we just give ourselves permission to play with the paint on the page. I love it. Drawing one soul collage card, one archetype card. It's a good way to start the day in reflection. And are you using a deck of archetype cards, cards that you created? There's a few different archetype decks out there that are wonderful. I love Kim Kranz's deck of archetype cards. So just simply, and I love soul collage cards for that personal reflection also. So just simply capturing the face. Again, it doesn't need to be perfect. It doesn't need to be realistic. What I'm going for is this idea of this woman in deep reflection, gazing off into the distance. And it's interesting that I picked two figures this morning that are facing away from each other. I know Blanca said she had one that was facing her image from yesterday, and I love mine are sort of facing away from each other, right? Like each in their sort of quiet space in their own internal space there. Kay, can you say more about your question? Ideas for archetype or soul collage cards? If you're not familiar with soul collage, I would highly recommend checking out Sina Frost's book. It's available on Amazon about soul collage. It's a great introduction and way to get started with creating soul collage. So, soul collage cards, you create your own. It's a beautiful process. Maybe I'll do a couple of sessions this month on soul collage cards. So I'm just starting to give a little more character to her eyes, and they look really creepy right now. That white is very white on there, but it's going to just give me that start, know where I'm going with her eyes. And I think I moved my Poscas back to the other side of the studio. Let's see. And then, so soul collage, you can also, there's great YouTube videos, Kay, on creating your own soul collage cards. It's a definitely a just unique collage process. And my favorite deck of archetype cards, also available on Amazon, is by Kim Kranz, Kranz, I believe. Has a wonderful deck of very unique types of archetypes and working with archetypes. So this figure had very dark eyes, so I'm just coming back and sort of blackening that up a little bit, bringing some of those shadows in the shape of her nose. Carolyn Mays has a extensive archetype deck as well. And I'm a big fan of creating your own deck of archetypes that are important to you. Like when we looked at the Jungian archetypes last week, right? Creating your own set. Soul Collage Evolving is the name of the book, and you can find that on Amazon by Seena, Seena Frost. All right, so I'm feeling okay about her face here. It was a little tricky just because the image underneath was dark, and so I was guessing a little bit at her face, but I think I've got that sort of captured of her sort of looking off into the distance, bringing some of those white highlights back. So you can see where sometimes we get, when you're painting faces, there's just a lot of details, and to just really take your time and not be in a rush, to take your time and not be in a rush. And working with faces just takes a long time. And so the more that you just kind of give yourself permission to practice this often, like find a bunch of bigger, like, like Vogue or fashion magazines that have close-ups of men's and women's faces are great for this kind of work, and all different kinds of faces. Oprah magazine, other magazines that you like that have big pictures of faces so that you can practice this technique. All right, so we have a face in our page. It's not a perfect face, but it's a face, and it's sort of capturing where I want to go. And I can see from looking at this that one of the things I'm going to want to do is have that background be even a little less busy. So while that red on her crown is drying before I add other colors to the flowers, I'm going to come back in one more time. with a little bit more blue in my background. Just push that background back even more. But here's the thing, if I had started simply with a layer of blue without adding all those other layers, there wouldn't be as much life to it. It would be sort of flat. Excuse me. And so those layers underneath create texture, life, richness of story. And to me, that's what deep reflection is about. It's that journey of going inward and then back outward, looking within and then looking around our environment. So the interplay of our inner world and our external world. And now she's popping out a lot more on the page. It's interesting, Marion. I love her artwork. It's definitely not my personal style, but I do love her artwork. Find it very unique. I have her animal deck and a little pocket-sized version of her tarot deck, and I really want her newest deck that she created as well, but I haven't gotten that yet. But I think what I love is her, like you said, her take on the archetypes and the animal images as well. So I love the book and her writing. So pushing that blue back so I don't completely lose all of my layers. I'm out of baby wipes, or I would go in here and maybe take even a little bit more of that blue back. But I can still see some of that, which creates just again a little bit more richness and texture on the page. So I'm going to come all the way back to those initial colors that I started with. That cad yellow, that fluorescent pink, and a little bit of my bright green, light green. Light green permanent is the name of this color, and it's such a wonderful green. And I'm going to continue just to build up her crown. With these different colors. I'm going to let them mix together. Use my brush to maybe create some different shapes and types of flowers. I think this picture was it was from an ad in National Geographic that was for black pearls, and so they have this image of this woman standing in water wearing this string of black pearls. It was an old National Geographic. I think Barbara asked about um, magazines I like for images. So when I'm doing soul collage or journey circle work, I really do love National Geographic, and I found recently a stash of them at a local thrift store. So I grabbed a few of them. They were 99 cents a piece. I'm probably going to go back and get a few more as well. And she had this beautiful, almost like a lotus flower here as well. Oops, page there. Any magazines will work. My local little library, someone has a subscription to Cowboys and Indians magazine, which I had never seen, but has great images. Someone else left a bunch of good housekeeping. So look at local thrift stores, ask at your local library for old magazines, but I like a variety of magazines. And I love Breathe and Spirituality and Health. They have great art and images in them. Those are some of my favorites. Come in with some green, add to her pretty crown. Again, nothing too specific here. When I started this morning, I thought, oh, I'm going to get my Poscas and I'm going to draw some flowers and designs, but I think I'm really loving sort of the abstract look of this beautiful crown that she's wearing. Maybe just bringing in a few leaves here on the page, almost as if she's wearing a floral gown or dress of some kind. I may darken up her hair and bring a little detail back to that. I may even just bring some of our color back a little bit to the page. So allowing yourselves to just play on the page. And when I'm doing this process on my own, I'm usually sitting in quiet, listening to some music. A lot of times I'm listening to a nonfiction audiobook. Like I just finished listening to Sharon Blackie's Haggitude, which is all about older stories of older wise women. Not loving that down there, so I'm just going to pull that back and then it'll even look even more like it's just a dress that she's wearing. Didn't quite get the perspective on this arm right over here. So we're just going to paint it out. Maybe just give her some flowers like she's wearing a beautiful flowered wrap. But when I'm doing this work on my own, I am often in deep reflection. It's one of the things I love about this process, and working with intuitive collage especially, is that opportunity to just allow what's inside to come outside onto the page. Allow what's inside to come outside onto the page. And oftentimes when I begin, I'm not conscious necessarily of what's going on within. Sometimes I'm very conscious of it and need time to be processing. But if I don't give myself the space and the time to look at and reflect on what's going on, I find that there's sort of a vague dissatisfaction, just an underlying feeling of worry. And I can usually figure out what it's about if I just pause. And oftentimes for me, deep rest and deep reflection go hand in hand, right? They go hand in hand when I'm in deep rest, which means doing nothing. It's an absence of doing. It's not sleeping, but it's daydreaming, sitting gazing at the clouds, looking out a window, just being quiet. Could be meditation, but it's being still and having an absence of input. So not music or audiobooks, but it could be painting in silence and just noticing what's going on, allowing your thoughts to roam, not to follow them, not to force yourself to be quiet, but just notice what's there present underneath the surface. All right, so not loving the bits in the background, loving the having the floral sort of cape or cloak that she's wearing. It's interesting, both these have sort of amorphous wrapped in these cloaks shapes. Totally fine, just noticing that for a little bit of a color. So I'm just going to come in, get some water on these and get rid of them. So again, you guys are seeing my process. I'm painting, I'm taking paint away. I'm painting, I'm taking paint away to get to that place where I'm happy with the piece and the image. So I'm happy with the face. I'm happy with this sort of, she has this look of fierce focus on her on her face, right? Like she's gazing off into the distance, deeply connected with herself. A little bit of white. All right. Can everybody still hear me? My computer just beeped at me and said that my system disconnected. So, all right, looks like I'm back live again. Okay, don't know what happened there. Something happened. Can you type yes, you can hear me if you're still with me? Okay, awesome. Thank you. All of a sudden it was beeping in my ear here. Thank you guys. All right, so I'm going to come in with just a really tiny little brush. It's so helpful to have such a variety of sizes of brushes in your arsenal, in your toolbox. I'm just going to brighten this up with a little bit of white, as if there's sunlight. It's funny, on the screen they look really, really white, so I'm thinking they may be a little whiter than I want them to be. So I can just blend that in with some of these colors. Maybe make them look a little more like flowers or the centers of some of the flowers. Okay, thanks, Marion. That's helpful. Yeah, it's the first time I've had the computer pop up and say that the software that I use for the live streaming had disconnected me. All right, so that's a little brighter than I want, but I'll go back over it with yellow, and that will help to soften up those whites. It's a fairly dark piece. It doesn't need that much white, but you never know until you start, right? You never know until you start. I'm going to repeat maybe just some little bits of that down here. And I love working with acrylics and using my brush to let them really sort of pile up on the page. You can't see it on the screen, but this page has quite a bit of texture. What if we did come in with maybe some, as if she had a string of beads around her neck there. All right, so I'm going to come right back over that with some yellow. So I'm still going to get those really nice bright pops, but they're going to feel more like part of the piece and not so separate. Just blend all of that in a little bit more. But it looks now we've got some light shining on her crown. We've got a little bit of light also down here shining on her beautiful cloak. And I can always tell when I'm starting to get fussy and too caught up in the details that it's time to take a break and just walk away. Time to take a break and walk away and come back a little bit later and see how it goes. But today, our focus on self love was this idea of how essential to our thriving, spending time in deep reflection, deep rest, and connection to self is an essential part of self care. As always, thank you for joining me. This is Dr. Minette Riordan. This is Painting in Your PJs, live with Minette here Mondays to Thursdays at 7 a.m. Mountain Time. And all month long, we are talking about self love, self acceptance, self compassion. And it's Thursday today, so I will be back next Monday with I don't know what, but we'll see. So I never know really. I have a theme, but I sometimes just show up in the morning and poke around at what's lying on my desk or go through a box of collage images to look for some of that inspiration. But enjoy the rest of your week. Have a beautiful, beautiful weekend. Thank you so much for joining me live, and I will see you all soon. Bye bye.